Hello, everybody. First of all, entering into this final segment of the conference, I would like to thank the organizers of the event, of the conference, but also to the speakers, because I have learned a lot in these 2 days of work. And this presentation is going to, as you see, it would relate development, natural resources, and climate change. And the first session of my presentation would be a kind of contextual part, which is based on my own research. Secondly, I would have some key messages of the IPCC 6th assessment report. And finally, a personal conclusion. Okay. Having said that, I would like to just start by mentioning something that has been already taken care of in previous presentations with regard to the context in which all this debate is taking place, with regard to the different gaps in the current socioeconomic global situation, gaps for development in terms of finance, trade, technology, social situation, energy, and environment, and in particularly climate change, and also challenges of the decarbonization and growing conflicts. Here is something which is associated to what has been said from the very beginning with regard to the issue of inequality, which is characterizing the world today. And in that case, it's a reference to the socioeconomic or particularly economic asymmetries in the world, in the current world. I'm going just to make a short reference to one aspect. For instance, you see here how 14% of the global population living in 41 countries, the highly industrialized countries, for instance, generate more than 60% of global exports, income out of export. However, we have another contrasting situation in Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. There also we have around 40% of global population, 45 countries, but in that case, the export income generated by those countries is less than 2% of global export. And this is only an example of this contrasting situation that was mentioned from the very beginning, all of this based on the data from the IMF. And secondly, this is a quick reference to the current situation that was already mentioned in terms of the weakness with regard to the economic dynamics of the world in the last few years. And there we can see specifically the situation, for instance, of Latin America, that has been a region with one of the worst economic performance in this period. And here we have one of the main challenges for developing countries, which is the foreign debt. Foreign debt, which is at the moment totalizing more than 12 trillion US dollars. And if we take, for instance, the cumulative service of this foreign debt only for the period 2010 to 2023, the amount is more than 46 trillion US dollars. And if we analyze, for instance, for the last year, 2023, this payment for servicing the foreign debt accounts for more than 36% of the export income out of export for these countries. And this is still representing a serious obstacle for development. In here, I would like to very quickly, because I have only 10 minutes for this presentation, I would like to refer to the whole issue, the debate on environment and development, and in that sense, calling the attention, of course, the relevance of the different principles adopted in the Rio conference, but also the Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but also specific reference to the strategic resources. And we have been listening in the previous intervention many references to this issue of the strategic natural resources, specifically critical minerals, as part of this energy transition that is taking place. It's an ongoing process. Here is also a specific nexus, a specific connection, which is very relevant in talking about sustainable development and natural resources, which is the interlinkages between food, energy, and water, and also the reference to the current situation as a triple planetary crisis, including references not only to climate change, but also to biodiversity loss and pollution. And with regard specifically to climate change, the analysis of this challenge for development, considering what has been said in terms of the historical perspective, the linkages with other environmental challenges and the implications for development, taking into account that the carbon footprint represents more than half of the global ecological footprint. And this has to do, for instance, with the composition of the commercial energy balance, which is based in more than 82% on fossil fuels, as we all know. And with regard to the general debate on climate change, we have two very specific areas of consideration. Firstly, is the scientific side, in which the IPCC result is a good reference. But also we have the multilateral negotiations, which is the political process, the multilateral political process. With regard to science, there has been an evolution that has been rapid, and I would say that the science has been at the height of the expectations. However, the multilateral negotiation has been much more slow and fragmented, taking into account the way in which this process has been taking place. This is the reference to the sixth assessment cycle of the IPCC that has been a very intense, was a very intense cycle in which 3 special reports were produced, one on 1.5, the global warming of 1.5 degrees, climate change and land, and on ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. But in addition to that, the 3 main reports of the working groups were approved, and the synthesis report. And there we have some common messages out of this 6th assessment report. The first one is the urgent need of action, of climate action. Secondly, the importance of responses that are immediate but equitable. Thirdly, the risk that climate change poses for compliance with the Sustainable Development Goals. And fourthly, the growing costs and risk associated to the delay in responding to climate change. And here, with regard to the risk, there are not only risks associated to climate change, but also potential risks that could be associated to the responses to climate change, to the strategies to respond to climate change in terms both of adaptation and mitigation. So it's the two sides analysis. And here we have some graphs which are taken, iconic figures that are taken out of the report. This one in relation to the different kind of scenarios regarding different levels of warming and the implications in terms of the temperature increases. Here, potential adverse implication for biodiversity in terms of biodiversity loss, and also a reference to the so-called climate resilience development as a concept in which we have this in the upper part, this green trajectory, which are much more associated to sustainability and to sustainable use of natural resources. And here we have information with regard to the trends in the emissions, greenhouse gases emission, to call the attention that we are not on track to limit warming to 1.5. And also different trajectories associated to business as usual, but also to some of the most ambitious mitigation goals, for instance, 1.5 and 2 degrees. As part of the AR6, also it is emphasized that there are options available now in every sector that can at least reduce by 50% emission by 2030. And it is important to call the attention that in this occasion, there is a specific reference to the demand side that was already mentioned in some of the presentation, the importance of demand orientation in terms of the responses with the potential to reduce global emission by 40 to 70% by 2015. And here is a way in which this connection between sustainable development and the mitigation strategy was assessed as part of the report. For instance, for the mitigation options, there is an analysis of potential synergies and potential conflicts with regard to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We have an example here for agriculture, mitigation options in agriculture and forestry, but this same protocol was followed with other mitigation options in other sectors. The pluses are synergies, the minuses are potential conflicts, and the dots are in which both of them are taking place. And finally, to conclude, I would like to make a general personal comment with regard to this combination of reinforcing climate change and the impact of the recent pandemics, calling the attention that the adverse effect of both global challenges have been combined with serious effect, for instance, in very sensitive areas as food security, affecting particularly to vulnerable countries. Secondly, the increase in asymmetries and inequity as part of this during this period, and the fact that the solution proposed for responding to these global challenges are not taking due account of existing socioeconomic gaps, nor the development and equity priorities of most of the humanity living in the third world. Firstly, that the most vulnerable countries and communities continue to face the greatest risks from the pandemics and climate change. And finally, something that has been also mentioned by other speakers, other potential risks that could be reinforced in the future, even in the near future, and some of them already taking place today, which are the possibility of new forms of protectionism based on the carbon content of the products and services that are commercialized, trade wars, and also new forms of trading with nature, commoditization, that was already mentioned by other speakers. With this, I would like to conclude this short presentation as a kind of motivation for the debate. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I will pass the word to Constanze to her initial remarks.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Constanze Veeh. I work for the, as mentioned, European Commission in the Directorate of Industry, where I mainly work on raw materials policy, and the unit that I'm working in was mainly responsible for the Critical Raw Materials Act that has been mentioned in the previous session already. I would like to say a few words about our raw materials strategy that we haven't had since 2020, but actually since way before 2008, which is based always on 3 pillars that you can easily identify. Number one is, and this is based on the fact that we in the European Union see a growing dependence on imports of raw materials, mainly critical raw materials, now very many of those that are actually of strategic importance for the energy transition. And we base our strategy on the 3 pillars of increasing our domestic capacity, which I've already heard referred to as extractivist regimes, as if we hadn't had any mining in Europe ever before. Then on diversification of our imports from abroad, and also, and this is a very often somewhat overlooked in this discussion, but very important point for us, also on recycling and circular economy. We very strongly believe that if you take it out of the earth, you should use it as often as you can. And so these are the three pillars that the Critical Raw Materials Act also addresses. Since it is legislation and we have only the power to legislate or regulate in Europe, a lot of this actually pertains to Europe, the provisions that are in it. That being said, of course, what we do in Europe and what we allow into the single market and what we allow into the single market is a bit of a strong term, but what we import into the single market has a large impact around the world that as a European, you quite often overlook. But if we make legislation on which fuels ships can use to enter our ports, we will have to use that fuel regardless which other ports they go to. It is quite simply that, if they want to get into European ports, that is. So I find this, I'm very much looking forward to this discussion because I think it is quite often internally overlooked where the European Union is seen as just a regulator. And only very recently as a geopolitical player that it actually has implications of what we do and what we don't do and what we support and what we don't support. So I very much look forward to this discussion. When it comes to our kind of geopolitical stance, we have basically two main strategies that we published. Number one is the Green Deal, our implementation of actually having signed the Paris Agreement, and what that means for the European Union and the 27 member states within it, and what we need to do. And also the Global Gateway, which is our foreign, I'm going to call it foreign policy instrument, even though that is not technically right, but you can regard it as such. Where we emphasize how we want to collaborate with the rest of the world. And so it is quite noticeable, and I'd say this from a very personal perspective, the day in the office that I didn't have some kind of dissociation hasn't happened yet. Because quite often what we want and what we need to do to get to where we want to be is somewhat different. But I do believe that we actually have the right goals. It's a matter of implementation on how to get there. So it's a non-ideal theory. Let's call it like this. But when you look at the Global Gateway and who we collaborate with also on strategic raw materials, we do have a very strong emphasis on actually meeting our counterparts on equal footing, on increasing welfare on both sides and not continue, even though that is, it will probably never look like this, but we certainly do not want to continue colonialism. We want to be fair partners to the partners that want to work with us, which is very pertinent in a world that is increasingly marked by geopolitical tensions between, and you can count any number of countries, but the biggest ones surely are the US and China and the trade war that they're currently engaging in. And so we see that as a European Union, we have to be much stronger also internally, not as the Union, but as European countries. We have to take more responsibility for what we do internally. We have to take more responsibility also for the raw materials that we need. This is, for example, why the Critical Raw Materials Act also has a large focus on domestic production of raw materials and processing and recycling, but also towards the outside world, where we take our share of this burden. And with this, I would stop and probably just pass on to my right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Since it's the last roundtable, this wonderful conference, I'm here not just as a representative of this project, this very huge project of extractivism, but also as a director of one of the important research centers in the Maghreb, in the MECAM. It's why also it's codified as Ibn Khaldun talk, which is an important instrument in our center in Tunis to discuss even such topics. And this topic of energy transition, but also climate change is so important in the last years in our center. We have several research projects explicitly on the impact, what you just showed, Ramón, of global warming for our region. We are working since some years now on the topic of disparities and which future can have groups, or societies, or nations of the Maghreb regarding the whole transformations globally and locally. Is why the title of our project is Imagining Futures and Dealing with Disparities. Yeah, just some words on the impact of global warming on the Maghreb. I think it's really we can see the deepening of disparities and inequalities on all levels, gender level and regional levels. You look to cities and rural areas in the Maghreb. It's just discussed with my colleagues from Algeria. They said we have the Sahara in the north now. We have something like 50 degrees is normal. And that's it's crazy. Just one citation used usually for my Tunisian colleague who is geographer. It means when a Maghrebi family can't make a couscous, don't have the all ingredient to make couscous, this means you have a big crisis. You have no water, you have no vegetables, you have no beers, etc., etc. Usually, couscous is the simple, thing to cook for all families in the Maghreb, and we are now in this situation. We have really the aridity and scarcity of water, and this means we have phenomena like migration, internal migration to the cities, and migration from Africa. This means it's something new just in the last years, which means violence, internal violence. It's a phenomenon in Tunisia, for example, or in Morocco, and in Algeria. That's something new, racism against African citizens, etc., etc. So these countries have really great problems now and crises in all levels. How to deal with new behaviors of their citizens, I see. And in the other side, we have one of the interesting, important regions in the world, since it's in the middle of three continents, to Africa, to Asia, and to Europe, and they can play a very important role, geopolitically well-placed, well-positioned. And we have even when Constanze Veeh speaks of raw material or energies for Europe, that's one of the important regions to help Europe to have this energy transition, since you have not only this proximity to Europe, but also network of pipelines, of cables already existed since years, since between Europe and North Africa. And yeah, and you have also historical affinities. We have all contacts are not negatively. Of course, you have this colonial history, but now you have young people who have turned to Europe and etc. etc. But to get this as a chance, we have from both sides, I think, things to do. For example, the Maghreb has to speak with one voice against Europe. No, it's an important thing as a region, not as an. But we have a fragmented Maghreb. Yeah, just speaking about the three important countries, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, they have completely different foreign policy strategies. Taking Algeria's turn to the Group 77, BRICS, etc., to Russia and to still in the colonial and post-colonial we say ideology and thinking. It's also because of the history of this country. The second country is Tunisia. It's really a fragile country. In the last time, it was the country with the most hope for democracy, etc. And now we have, really re-authoritarianization of this country, and with very big problems regarding economical issues, and they have no real clear foreign policy and preferences, but they turn mostly to Europe and France. And then we have Morocco, who is a country turned more to the US and Israel, explicitly after the Abraham Accords. They want to have more support from US and this to have more alliances with this post Trump group in the world. So it's a very big problem. And then the second one is we have a diversity of actors. What the Europeans have to understand, they are not the only actor in this world. Explicitly in the Maghreb, we have the EU, we have the US, of course, we have China, Russia, Turkey. We have the Gulf states are very active in this region, etc., etc. So you have to give more to get something from there, because they have other possibilities to. It's not only positive, but just to say there's concurrence. There are a lot of actors regarding Libya, for example. We have, of course, a terrorist group and armed group like Wagner, who is really an important actor in extractivist strategies in Mali and in Libya. Wagner Group is an important actor today in extractivism. And then, of course, to do this, to have one voice as a Maghrebi states, as Maghrebi region, we have to include the local societies. And I think in the all presentation we heard yesterday and today, it's an important issue. But when we have dictatorship, and we have dictatorship, there's another description for Algerian, Moroccan, and also more and more Tunisian regime. This means the local societies are excluded in this dealing with Europe or other actors, and we have a region with a lot of conflicts. Western Sahara is one example, Libya is another, and so there's the conflict we have to deal with, and to look how to find a solution. Maybe in this in these strategies of Europe, like even a Green Deal, I have also to take in consideration how to find solutions for such big problems. And I think also, it's possible to make from this energy transition, because we have this energy, an opportunity for the Maghrebi societies, for the Maghrebi economies, for the Maghrebi internal transformations. But I think we have, to help also, we have to this Green Deal or Green Partnership with the individual states, they have to be called, accompanied by a social deal also. A social deal. We have a problem with importation of food. We have a region which is dependent by something like 60–70% of food, import of food, and we have a surplus of food in Europe. Maybe we can find a solution how to help this region also to have self-sufficiency in agrarian and food sufficiency, and we have to take it in consideration in the strategies toward the market. And another condition is the access to the European market. Europe have never learned to take its neighborhood as an important market and as an important actor, and to include that in Europe. We have, until today, a lot of products from the Maghreb has no access to the European market. And please, why should the Maghreb give you access to their energies? These simple elements Europe has to include. And the last one is we are asking that we have a lot of discussions since the European last election. What will be the future of this relation with your neighborhood in the Maghreb, since you have rightist groups, and the last thing is, of course, France, and it will be a catastrophe really. And maybe, I'm not sure if the Commission, with new election, maybe with the help of the red groups in the European Union, is still interested to have a Green Deal with the region. Just to provoke a little bit of discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for your introduction on the focuses of the discussion. I have a pair of questions to each of you, and then we can open up for discussions and questions from the audience. Ramón, I would start for you because continuing the order. You were talking about a paradox when it comes to international climate negotiations, right? Is increasing urgency, particularly on the global south with catastrophe, climate catastrophe and global warming and so on. But at the same time, gradually slower and more fragmented multilateral political process or practices, right? And we have been discussing on this conference at 2 days that the global energy transition means maybe, or not maybe, clearly, a growing demand and a growing needs of new natural resources, especially minerals that are look for the green technologies that are located in the global south. So this, in a theoretical level, can dynamize or create opportunities for changing North-South relations. So my question would be, what is the role of the global south as a bloc, if we can even say that? So we can even open the question to that. Can we call global south a bloc, or we have some very hard distinctive the divisions within those groups? So what is the role in international climate negotiation? And what would be mostly a shared interest goal that confronts with, again, can we call it a global north or not? But my question would be exactly how to find a new role, a new insertion, maybe more powerful or maybe more full of traps. And in this international climate negotiations, which you are so familiar with?
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to answer this very interesting question on my personal capacity. And as it has to do with the negotiation part, as I said, the multilateral negotiation, in which, as you mentioned, in fact, the Global South countries have an important role, mainly within the G77 by China. I mean, the group of 77 plus China. And this within this group, we have close to 80%. This group represents almost 80% of global population. 134 countries, and I would say that if we are going to talk, of course, this is a very heterogeneous group, but if we are going to talk about the common, probably some of the common topics that are in some cases divergent topic in the relation with the global north. For instance, the issue of the historical perspective of the treatment of the historical perspective, the cumulative emission and consideration of the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and the respective capacities. I would say that this is something which is crucial in the context of the negotiation for the developing countries. And secondly, there are two other issues that are very relevant in this negotiation for developing countries. One of them have to do with the financial resources, the need of financial flows. And secondly, technology transfer under, the condition that allowed developing countries to be properly accomplishing their contributions to the global solutions to the climate issue. And this has to do with the consideration of climate change as a challenge for development. So I started my presentation calling attention of the development issue as a goal, not only in terms of the sustainable development goals, which are important, of course, but they are limited in their scope. But development in the general sense, which is much more a wide concept that has to do with the historical perspective, as I mentioned before, but also with the situation of the world that we have today. And I expressed in one of my first slides with regard to the existing asymmetries in the world, which are the root of this other. The root of other disparities and other asymmetries, for instance, in terms of the social situation, the energy situation, the real energy crisis of people, for instance, of 700 million people that don't have electricity in the world today. The problem for them is not to save electricity. The problem is they have never seen a lamp, and under this condition, you can imagine that we are going to talk of a global solution. We need necessarily to take into account these disparities. Otherwise, we are having a discussion which is not rooted in the reality that we are having. So this would be my first reaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So connecting to your answer, I will turn to my question to you. So when we talk about European Union, and you already mentioned this very recent discussion of a geopolitical player of the role of the European Union, right? And also how there is this long-term self-image of Europe of norm maker, but in some places norm giver or norm imposer. So considering that we have here a lot of people from specific regions of the Global South that tend to have some resentment toward European politics, and what Ramón just mentioned, that energy transition, we need to talk also, especially in the Global South and climate negotiation, we need to talk about financial flows and conditions of negotiations. And then you mentioned something I'm personally very interested in, the Global Gateway. Mm-hmm. And the Global Gateway having as precisely inserting itself within this new geopolitical arrangement, trade wars, European Union, United States, Belt Road Initiative also. So my question of the Global Gateway, it promotes itself as different. It is very open on this idea of sharing responsibility and meeting on equal footing, your own words right now. I would like to understand a little bit more, what is the equal footing that is being offered that differentiate from the other within this geopolitical understanding of what is the reconfigurations of the energy transition and the relations north-south, also based already with all the comments that Rachid just made on negotiations need to offer more, because the geopolitical game is opening more windows and more space for negotiation from the south to the north. And the European Union seems to be projecting, I agree that it's hard, foreign policies. So an initiative of development in the global development, let's say like this, or support of global development, that is the global gateway. What is different, or what is the proposal that maybe make global gateway interest for the global south and maybe enable this new geopolitical role to take advance the pathway of this geopolitical goal actually sells a new European Union to the global south?
Question. I'll get back to you. I think one of the main differences that I see, especially in the field of raw materials, is that for a long time we had a number of big global players, and I'll name them, China, Russia, the US, and especially for China, quite often what they offered when they came to a country wanting the raw materials was to build the mine, to build, not even to build the processing plant, to build the mine, to transport the ore to China, to staff the mine completely with Chinese workers. And once they're done, they're gone. They might leave a road behind. I've actually seen that happening. There's an asphalt road, there's an empty mine, and that is it. There's no economic development that is happening in the country. There's no value creation in the country. And especially on the raw material side, this is something that we think we can offer an alternative for by leaving value creation in the country beyond the ores and the concentrates. When you have processing capacity, when you get manufacturing capacity, Europe is still one of the biggest and best manufacturers of mining equipment and mining technologies. We still have very good engineers, they become fewer. And technology transfer is something that is very important in these regions, so that you can actually use your resources instead of just selling them at the lowest possible price to someone who wants to buy them at the lowest possible price. So I think in the field of raw materials, this is something that is actually a value proposition that doesn't just pertains to we want your raw materials and we get them however we can. You mentioned the Wagner Group, not very different from the Chinese, not from the European Union. Of course, do not understand me wrong. Of course, you know, every single deposit is different, every single mine is different, every single country that we're dealing with is different and needs to be handled differently. But diplomacy is also something that we're not entirely bad at. We are quite good at negotiations, as Maghreb not being able to sell agricultural products to the European Union can attest. So I think there's actually, the Global Gateway proposes that we support development in the region where we put the support, and we don't take the value out of that region. It's not just mining, that just happens to be the field that I work in, so there you go. But it's also infrastructure. It is also electricity. It is also clean drinking water. It is also all of these things that actually would help people directly in this region, maybe even aside from their authoritarian regime, because if you have a well right next to you, that is a well that you have access to. If you have electricity generation right next to you, you potentially have access to that electricity and do not just sell it all off. So I think this is the proposition that we make, which is not the worst out there in the world. Some of our say competitors tend to be a lot quicker. So I have seen it happening that you need a port, you get a port. It's just not yours, or you're in debt for the next probably 5,000 years, considering your GDP. So this is something where I think we try to, or the European Union, and that might be too idealistic. I've heard that said too sometimes, still tries the collaborative approach instead of the, well, non-collaborative or competing approach. So this is where I see the value in the Global Gateway.
Mhm. Now, going to the other side, going to Rachid. Rachid, you seem to be excited with this geopolitical game as a way of giving the Global South more space for negotiation. And I see the yeses and nos of this being an opening and a closing at the same time, or at least opening of new traps of negotiation. And you pinpoint one of the issues, which is unity, right? Shared baseline of interests is what lacks in the Maghreb in order to actually use this geopolitical game as a way to negotiate better as a unity. And you think there is a big opportunity for development, but then you pinpoint so many examples that give me the idea that energy transition is by far not the main priority of the region, or at least from the people in the region. And at the same time, he also talks about this issue, like kind of like a dichotomy between autonomy and interventionist politics, and how do you play this game in terms of creating win-win negotiations, especially with governments that do not tend to be democratic or pro for the majority of the population. So my question would be more on, especially we have been talking about this dark sides of sustainability. One of them is exactly negotiations on the state-state level between Europe and Maghreb that do not necessarily respond to the main interests of the people on the ground. We have especially the issue of migration or securitization of the energy transition. So could you develop a little bit more where you see these win-win negotiations that can actually create a development that is more just in the region? Like some, or where you see this opportunity going for, and when you talk about unity in the Maghreb?
Yeah, complicated question, but yeah, just to go back to this green partnerships. Until now, there are really single negotiations with single states, and that's the problem actually. When you negotiate, there are different actors. Tunisia has no capability really to negotiate something. There's in a deep crisis financially and etc. But you have seen the European Union to Said and negotiate something, and this Green Deal, you have these security issues are more important than the Green Deal in itself. It's a problem. And then you have Algeria, which has a comfortable situation because of the oil and gas, etc. And they have diversity of foreign policies. They have other preferences, like to be close with China and Group 77 or BRICS, etc., etc. And then you have Morocco. Officially that's the green island of the Maghreb, and with a lot of projects in renewable energies, etc. But the whole image is related to his position toward Western Sahara problematic. So I can understand why it's not so easy to deal with the whole Maghreb as a region, but we have even initiatives before. Barcelona process was one. Union pour la Méditerranée is another one. Maybe that wasn't project to, but that with big réussite, how to say it, yeah. But it's still possible to make a deal with the whole region, because the whole region is important for maybe security issues, migration issues, but also as a market, and we have to include them in this region. In there is no, as political scientists, there is no real power in the world without a good periphery. Yeah, and Europe is the only power without a good relation to his periphery, strategic periphery. And that's China is creating a periphery. Periphery not in negative sense, no. Periphery means to include the Maghreb in the European market. Yeah, in the whole European market, and I mean a lot of problems can be solved when we have jobs created in the Maghreb, for example. You have to create jobs. That's the first condition to as a strategy, and then we have solved some problems like migration and like. But now we have the migration of the intelligentsia from the Maghreb to Europe. Look into the migration strategies. The whole engineers are coming from there, and so yeah, it's.
If I try not to be flippant, but I want to ask, take us to your leader then. So who would the EU negotiate with for the Maghreb as a whole? Is it so united that you can make a deal with Algeria and it pertains to Morocco? Is there someone who speaks for the region? That is quite often the main problem, that there's no one that you can talk to in a region that is divided. You can include the whole Maghreb, but your policy with, or your deal with Algeria will not pertain to Morocco, will not pertain to Tunisia, will not. So you say we have to include them as a region, but what if the region is so divided that you cannot?
Mm-hmm. It's what I mean with the Barcelona process, for example, was started with single negotiations with single states, and then at the end we get the Barcelona conference. And the Barcelona conference is so interesting because they have three baskets, including cultural, social issues, and it was interesting. Not only the security issues and economic issues. And for example, this Greek idea of creating a Mediterranean market in 2015 was Greek. That's what. And why not create a Mediterranean energy market or energy transition something? Like I'm dreaming there.
I had a lot of other questions, but I already saw hands raising, and considering I have 1 hour, I would recommend I'm doing a list and I already noted one name. And okay, or not a second one, but the first one was Hove.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much for this roundtable. I know all of us are tired, but I'm gonna try to make my question very active and very dynamic to the debate. I think it's interesting just get around this table to see how we have conflicting views and conflicting dynamics on the future of whether it is the energy transition or the future of the Euro-Maghreb relationship or any other topics regarding the extractivism. I think this really, for me, as an observer, shows that we are still in the process of finding spaces of dialogue. And I think your issue you raised, most intense, is about what's the space? What's the space in which we can meet and discuss all these issues? We have Algeria on one side, and Morocco on the other side, and Tunisia. Unfortunately, there is no common space. And I think precisely because there is this fragmentation in North Africa. Here I'm referring to the region because I come from the region and I study it. So it's my starting point. But precisely because there is fragmentation, that what you consider as your competitor are a bit better than you when it comes to dealing with each one of these countries alone. I think if the EU has to reinforce its relationship with the country and make itself a better place in this geopolitical competition on how to be more engaged in this region, especially in the post-Gaza world. It's a trauma. It's a trauma for the region, and I put it again. You need really to find very smart and agile ways of rethinking the relationship with the South. The EU has the DGNIR, and the DGNIR has a great politics on the East. What about the South? We see a big disequilibrium. This imbalance in that. So how would you explain this imbalance between the East and the South?
Thank you both. I will insist that the questions are short so we can listen to more. And I'm Latin American. I'm calling people from the first name. I hope nobody's bothered. So the next one that I have on my list is Hans-Jörg. Veronica?
Question to Constanze Veeh.
There are two other people on this
Yes.
panel. Just say.
Two very short questions. You mentioned you negotiate on an equal level, so to say, yeah? But I think this is not enough. The countries in the global south are economically much weaker. There are many famous economists, Stiglitz, and many others. They argue we need to give one-sided privileges to the countries in the global south. We should allow them industrial policy. We should open markets for them, and they can still have protected markets. And we should try to help them to build up own companies, not FDI, not pushing our European FDI. And also no credits, if credits may be from the KfW. But my question is, what do you think about this one-sided privileges giving to the countries in the global south? So it's not a win-win situation. So, to help the countries in the global south, we have to sacrifice something. My second question is, it was quickly mentioned, the political right. I think how to handle that. I think because of the ecological crisis, for the next decades, the living standard will not increase very much. There's such a lot of investment necessary to avoid the worst things, but this will not increase the living standard. What would you recommend as strategy, having in mind that the living standard in Europe may not increase because of different reasons? What would you recommend?
Okay, I have next on my list Veronica and then Laura, and then we close this first session for answers.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I would like to ask you, how do you feel about the policy space, the industrial policy space that is provided for developing countries, and to what extent they would use natural resources, critical minerals as a strategy, as a leverage for industrial development? I mean, I can see that you are quite open to build industrial capacities in developing countries regarding these minerals. What do you think about, for instance, ban exports? Ban exports would not affect you if you are able to process these materials in your in the country of origin.
Thank you. This question, I think, is for all of you. And it comes also from my thoughts on this larger conference, in which me as an academic and many of us here as academics, we have kind of a lot of common shared goals and ideas. And especially when we think about the global north and the global south and the distinctions of the interest, I always worry about that we're not thinking too carefully about local actors in the global south who are invested in extractivism in their local regions, right? So how can we bridge that gap? Because here we kind of understand the problems and we understand how global north disparities are a problem, but on the ground, there's very little that it seems that resonates with powerful actors in the global south. And so how can we think more about that?
Thank you. I'll have to pass the mic for you because I think most of the questions are for you, but we also have.
The last I leave to my colleagues here.
Yes, of course. The last one is for the other two colleagues. You want to start?
Yeah, it's
Great.
It's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So that's what I mentioned, and your critique is right. So I mean, what I said, we haven't to forget. We have the same discussions like in the 50s and 70s and 60s, and this idealization of the South, the global South. And just this is why my former professor Elsner, when he wrote his article on state classes, we have dictatorships in the South. It's the point. We have dictatorship. Okay, we have former colonial powers, etc., etc. It's normal. They are looking for their interests. It's a normal thing in the international relations. But we have at home we have dictatorships, and that's the problem. And now the question is both how to organize the South, even if we can speak. The South is not homogeneous as we think. Yeah, it's just theoretically homogeneous one. How to organize to be a powerful negotiating actor, maybe the Maghreb or the 77 group, etc. It's also a normal to build coalitions, yeah. But how to build the same coalitions on the local level against this dictatorship? Because without democracy, we can't really critique Europe. I'm sorry, yeah. But that's so. And then when we have democracy, then we can tell our dictators or our regime, okay, no negotiation without our participation. No, and Europe tried this in the Barcelona process, even to include in this third basket the social actors on the local level as an actor of negotiation. So it's really, you are right, it's the most important question, I think, and how to use, even if these raw materials are in origin, especially in Latin America, it's so clear, no lithium from our region without to participate in, or to have a plan for to have more jobs, or to give me a plan of development or something like this, and then we can. And how to create this coalition is another question.
Would you like to?
Yeah, you said that these are, I would like to refer to these last points, which are, in my view, relevant. I would say that the expectation with regard, for instance, to industrial policies and many other opportunities that could be associated to this issue of the energy transitions and the role of critical minerals and so on is an important opportunity. It's an important window of opportunity for many developing countries if well used. If this potential is really properly used, and in that sense, what has been said in terms of possibility of alliance and integrative efforts really in practice for producers could be something that could contribute in that direction. I could say that in the history, there are many examples in which very good opportunities in that direction have been misused. And so having the theoretical potential doesn't mean that at the end we will have a success if not properly conducted. And secondly, with regard to the importance of the role of local actors, local communities, and so on, I could say that, for instance, in the case of climate change, the local dimension is crucial. And if we take, for instance, for adaptation, it's a very relevant scale in which, I mean, the impacts are felt there. And in that sense, if we are going to, for instance, think in terms of appropriate adaptation plan, you need to take into account the real conditions and the realities of these local actors and the local communities and so on, as even you mentioned in your own presentation and other colleagues here. So I would say, for instance, there is one condition that in my view, in my personal view, is crucial in responding not only to climate change, but also to other socioeconomic challenges that have to do with the national, regional, international, and local scale, which is equity. Equity not only between the North and the South, but also equity within the countries. And in that sense, this I would say that capture this the importance of this scale. But of course, it has to consider the way in which in each country the social consensus is built and the way in which equity is properly or not considered as part of the policy-making process.
Okay.
All right. So I'll start with the first one. We have DG NEAR. We also have DG INPA. So we have a program that specifically caters to our neighborhood, but also for the international partnerships. I don't see, well, of course, I do see a difference in how we deal with this. Some of these are basically also historically long our neighbors, and we have very close ties with them, and some of them are a bit further away. But the idea that we want to, and there we come, I will pick this up later when I answer the next questions, that we want to kind of, create some kind of equality pertains to both, whether it's Albania or whether it's, I'm not going to say Congo, probably not, or Zambia, thank you, Zambia, is still running through both of them, and informs the policy on how we deal with countries that are not in the European Union, the UK also. To the equal level, privileges for the Global South. That was question number 2. I do think that if we do it correctly, it is not going to be a win-win. It is going to be a better for us, better for them. And in theory, it should lead to something that is much better for our partner, because if you leave the value creation in the country, that is a long-term thing. Like, we can deliver mining equipment once, but they will have long-term gains from this. The question, of course, always is, how is it implemented? We usually work with, there are not that many European mining countries in the first place, but we don't go into the country with our own companies and say, you will mine here now. We work together with companies from the country that are mining in that country and that want to do the processing and that want to increase their value creation, move up the value chain. And I think in the long run, that is actually putting them in a much better position than they were before. But I will also say, you can go there with the best intentions, but if the implementation is not right, or if actors in that country have adverse ideas, there is only so much you can do. Speaking of these dictatorships, if you give them a processing plant and there's never an engineer there, it's not going to help anyone that much. So we also need to take care that the implementation is done right. And therefore, sometimes I think we are a bit more hesitant in investing a lot. No credits from the KfW, why not? Because they would have to give them back?
Yeah.
So grants?
Yeah.
That is what you want? Okay.
Grants would be the best.
Well, I do think there's already a number of schemes that actually are grants. I will mention one because that is also the last question a bit. And it's just an example, because I do agree with your question that the actors on the ground are very important, and my co-panelists, that of course you need to the actors, but there's always someone above that you also need to kind of take into consideration. But I really like this project, so I'm going to mention it here. The GIZ, so the Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, and the BGR, the Bundesanstalt für Geowissenschaften und Rohstoffe, had a really great project in the Congo where they certified artisanal and small-scale mining for cobalt, which means that small-scale miners now have an option to sell it to someone else, but the Chinese, that comes with a truck, because now it's certified. It's certified that this is clean, this is not under the conflict minerals regulation, that you can take it anywhere. So this is great for the people who do the mining. At the same time, they also educated people from the Congo as auditors for the scheme. So you can have the certification done by the people locally, and you also give the people that whose livelihood depends on the fact that they need to sell ores to someone, a lot more range on who they can sell it to. And I think that is a great example of very local action that has a very big impact on this community. And then I still have two more questions that I need to answer. Political right. I personally think that within probably the next 2 to 3 mandates, I'm going to dismantle my job completely, and then I can retire. I hope it will not come to this. I do not see that. For now, I think with von der Leyen still kind of getting a second mandate, the geopolitical commission will continue in some form, and the things that we already implemented, we can probably continue. If it shifts more, and if it shifts more towards the nationalism, I don't see that we will have that big of a geopolitical impact. I don't think that we will have this much cooperation, and we surely will not have a focus on cooperating. That is not their idea. Let's be fair. And this is something that worries me deeply, because I do think I probably watched way too much Star Trek when I was a child, but I do think that we're better off when we collaborate and when we work together than when we compete with each other for limited resources. Which cooperation, climate change and the mitigation of climate change is a global challenge. And in my opinion, very personally, we need to tackle it globally, and we need to forget about who gets to do what and who has the most, Mozambique, who has the most emissions, who has the least emissions. We all need to put in effort, and if we can put in more effort to address this, then we actually would need to, by pure mathematics, we should by all means do it, because it's better for everyone. But that's just me, so I should say that. And there was one last question, but I think I answered that. Value creation in the country. Yes, this is something that we try to do. Personally, I am not a huge fan of export bans in and by itself, because I do think trade is a very important instrument for many countries and for the global economy, that you can use for your own profit. As a country, even as a weaker country, you just need to negotiate, right? Sorry, didn't think there. And when we have a very pertinent example for export bans right now, as I'm sure you're well aware, Indonesia banned the export of the oil because they wanted to create local value. They wanted to go into the processing. They've done that very successfully, but a good 60 to 70% of their processing capacity is owned by the Chinese. So on paper, it looks like Indonesia is doing great, but how much value is actually left in the country, and what good did their export ban bring them if, you know, this is what you have? And now,
Yeah.
do you have more?
Yes, I have more.
Do you have more for these gentlemen here?
So I have one question that I will take my advantages being the moderator, and then we open the floor again. I have a couple of names already listed here, but I want to be a little bit provocative with what you just said. I'm so sorry, but I think it's like you just said you were not in favor of exports ban, and you talk about the Indonesia's case, but then again, if I recall correctly, European Union activated the World Trade Organization against Indonesia, right?
Yes.
And my second point connected to
Because
that.
in general, we're not a fan of export bans.
But yes,
We're not a fan of trade restrictions.
But trade restrictions, how do we enter? The European Union is not in favor of trade restriction, but it does have, based on the 3 pillars also, increase domestic capacity, diversification, and imports. And then it entered, at least in Latin America, became very polemic this year, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is a trade restriction from the other side. So I wouldn't question exactly how does that play out, because, for example, we were discussing here, with whom we're going to negotiate, Maghreb, authoritarianism, okay. A very, very important country in terms of ecological and size-wise for Latin America. Brazil elected a government with a president that has, at least narratively, and I think the person that could discuss that it's not president, but narratively Brazil with Lula has a politics that is pro-green industrialization, and so on and so forth. Lula is by far one of the biggest criticals of CBAM. And exactly because it does not fit in the strategy of mutual win-win or better. So I would put, like, if you say the European Union is traditionally against trade restriction, is that changing exactly because of this geopoliticization and this maybe mitigation of climate change, reducing its importance for more energy security and reduction of vulnerabilities? And how would that play for, at the same time, the idea of better negotiations with the Global South? Maybe we collect a couple more questions that I have on my list before. Gender balance is reflecting again, but I have Hannah as the first person on my list. Okay.
Thank you very much. I have a short question for each of you. I think in our discussion, we take the answers, the progressive answers of climate change for granted. But to be serious, I don't think that is for sure. Looking at the world level, the BRICS accepted new countries that are essentially oil countries. So there's a new power block, a revisionist power block being built. How does that is being discussed within the IPCC? And is there also a power change within the IPCC towards those new, old countries imposing other ideas how to confront climate change? And this brings me to Constanze Veeh. Second short question. One answer to this trend of the European Union, of course, is entering new raw material partnerships with southern partners. But at the same time, there is the idea of relocating production of raw materials towards the European territory. Does that bring also environmental conflicts back to Europe, and how will Europe handle those conflicts within its own territory? And this, Rachid, what does then Algeria and Morocco do if those raw materials are being processed and produced in Europe? Isn't that a factor for immense crisis in the countries?
Okay, on my list here, I have, I'm not sure, Juan Infante, did you raise your hand? No? So then the next one is Christoph, and then Eunice.
First question for Rachid. You mentioned the jobs are so important, but is it not completely idealistic or irreal to think that jobs will be produced sufficiently for the very young population of the Maghreb, including Egypt? And modern industry doesn't need much. Highly productive. Modern agriculture is highly productive. And so what we have is basically services at a low level of productivity and a low income. And wouldn't one not have to rethink then the development path? And concerning Europe, I believe Europe has a credibility problem because it is the whole home of former colonial powers, and the EU trade policies were always in favor of the EU, and the development assistance was usually also very helpful for the companies of Europe. And France liked to intervene very directly, and Germany a little bit behind, Mali and other places. And now with the conflict in Gaza, then I think at least our own government took a very different position than it did concerning the Russian aggression against Ukraine. On the one hand, being very happy about the international court rulings concerning Putin, and then suddenly saying no, in case of Netanyahu, the court is on the wrong side. So I would say that the European Union, with its nation states, and especially my own state, has a real credibility problem. But concerning now your proposition, we have seen research on South Africa, where the government actually wanted to condition FDI and make sure that the companies who had access to South Africa and help South African business. And they conditioned them that they should then support local suppliers. But they did not have the capacity and the will in the end to enforce the conditions. And my question would be then, what kind of sanctions does the European Union have in relationship to European companies then moving into Africa to make sure that all the wonderful ideas and formulated always in a way of making sure that the Chinese look very bad, which is not quite so true as you may have painted it, whether you can actually stick to what you were saying. That's the big question, whether you can enforce these kind of conditions on multinational companies, which are usually no longer really a place located, but are supported by all the money elites in the world.
Eunice was the last one.
Thank you very much. I have a question, especially to Ramón. Ramón, you are not only the vice chair of IPCC, but also Cuban and director of World Economic Center in Cuba. My question is on small countries negotiations. You arose the norm of equity. I'm interested in equity at international level, also global, local, also important, but at local level. My question is, there's no equity without empowerment, and I'm interested in your insight and your expertise in negotiation. How could we, or how will be the small countries, just like Cuba, just like Mozambique, we have the example today, are a little bit empowered in the international negotiation, just like in Paris Agreement and so on. Can you tell us if China also plays a role in such negotiation? And we are interested in your.
Thank you. So as your question was directed to Ramón, I'll pass it straight to him.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, previously there was a question with regard to this issue on the BRICS and the inclusion of oil producers in the last wave of in the second wave of widening of BRICS and the consideration from the IPCC, if I understood well. Well, first of all, I would like to clarify what the role of the IPCC is. The IPCC is not a decision-making body. The IPCC is an assessment body. The role of the IPCC is to assess relevant scientific and socioeconomic literature relevant with regard to the science of the climate change. So in that sense, within the IPCC, they are not negotiating groups to negotiate the decisions. This is not, I separate very well in my presentation the scientific side in the debate on climate change, and secondly, the decision-making process at the political level, the multilateral negotiation process. So these are separated processes. They are, of course, related in some sense because the IPCC products are inputs for the negotiation as a reference for the negotiation, but the IPCC, the mandate of the IPCC is to produce a balanced, robust, scientifically robust product, but without being prescriptive. It's policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive. In that sense, for the IPCC, I mean, the IPCC assess the literature, but has not a position to take with regard to this conformation of different grouping. I mean, in the international field and so on. So I would like just to clarify that because it's a different role. It's not a decision-making body. With regard to the second question, I would say it's very important because for very small countries, this is a real problem. Cuba is small, but it's not one of the smallest. Even there are other, but Cuba, of course, is a relatively small country. But I would say that in that case, we have had an experience which has been progressing, which is the role of the small island developing states. And this group of countries within the negotiation, and again, this is a separate process. It's not the IPCC one. This is the negotiation. I'm not a negotiator myself, but I would like to insist in that because I have been answering questions because I said this is in my personal capacity because this is another process. But the small island developing states have been particularly active in the negotiations. And this is an example in which alliances are crucial with regard to the trying to improve the bargaining power of a set of group of countries. I cannot say that this is a perfect process, but for sure has been a process in which this alliance has produced relevant results in my view, in my personal view. There is an alliance of a small island development, AOSIS in English, which is the alliance of small developing states that are a kind of negotiating group within the G77 plus China, because within this, as I said before, it's a huge group, very heterogeneous, with different perspectives. One of them is the AOSIS with this small, because there are two characteristics there. They are small, but also islands. And so they are within the most vulnerable countries and being small and also islands. And this is a very interesting process. For instance, they had a crucial role in asking the IPCC, and how this is the IPCC, asking the IPCC to consider the possibility of having a special report on the implication of 1.5 warming, global warming of 1.5 degrees. And well, this is a proposal in which the role of this group was very active, very important, and at the end, the IPCC took the decision that this special report was produced and was approved by the year 2018, and with important consideration in that sense, because for the small island developing state, this mitigation goal of 1.5 is very important, considering the adverse effect of climate change beyond that threshold, that limit. So this is an example. As I said before, they have, of course, limitations due to their conditions, but they have been in this process of trying to take a joint decision, and this is even being so small, they have had some results. As I said before, it is not a perfect process, but it's an example, at least in my view, on how to proceed in these cases. So it's, this is my first reaction to that.
Great, thank you. Should I pass to you?
Sure.
Yes.
Siban, I'll start off with a nice question at the start. Again, personally, this is I think the only time you hear me criticize the European Union. I think that was a terrible idea. But at the same time, it is also, in a way, a geopolitical instrument, because it forces producers outside to reduce carbon emissions. And again, as a global citizen, I don't care who saves the carbon emissions. I really don't. So I think in that sense, when you kind of look at it from a global perspective, it is also not the worst idea that you can have, that you say, you know, you do better on the CO2 emissions, and there's less import tariffs, no import tariffs, whatever to be paid. So, and sometimes you need to kind of play this, as you would say in billiard, über die Bande. So sometimes you need to hit someone else to get other people to do the right thing. So again, not a huge fan, but in the end, sometimes that's what it is. Plus, it was actually in the works way before. What did you say it was?
Yeah, it was in the previous government already, right?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Progressive answers to climate change. I'm still an optimist. So I see that, you know, when it comes to renewable energy generation, PV is really taking off, as is wind, and we have a 50%, I think, renewables in the energy mix at this point, which I think is a great thing, and you can see it coming. Climate mitigation, I think we're still lagging behind quite a bit. I would not assume that the oil countries remain oil-producing countries, and that they are not moving in the raw materials, especially for energy transition technology space. Just, you know, something to look out for. Raw materials partnerships, environmental conflicts in Europe. Yes, absolutely. We have them. That is not a question. We have one of the best rare earth deposits in all of the world, somewhere in Sweden. It is never going to be developed because it is very close to Stockholm. So we already have the environmental conflicts that come with raw materials extraction. But at the same time, and again, here, I'm a European and a fan of our industry. That's why I work where I work. We also have some of the best extraction technologies, not necessarily for rare earth. China is well ahead of us in that regard. But for many things, we can do it much cleaner than anywhere else in the world. And I think it's time, as a European, that we also, again, take a share of the burden. If we need the raw materials, we should take care of that. We also get some from our own country and not go like, oh, this is a nice nature preserve for the future. Because I think that's just in general unfair globally. Speaking of which, now I'm going to contradict myself. Yes, of course, we have a credibility problem. Yes, of course, we were the colonial powers. Yes, of course, development assistance was, and especially trade agreements quite often are in favor or were in favor of the European Union. But what did you expect? We're not a charity. We still take care of 80 million people and their livelihood. We still care about that as well as everyone else's. Probably more, and even more if the right comes more into power. Well, then it's probably only 50 million. But in any case, you know, this is a question of a reality check. Of course we buy it. Why wouldn't we be? Everyone else is
doing that, you know, then say that Europe is not the good power, it is a power.
I did not. Did I say that we want to do good?
At the same level as you said in the beginning, you know, you were saying we go to Africa in a different way than the Chinese and much better than the Chinese. That is not true. There is a completely other history behind it. So
yes, absolutely.
I'm not trying to convince the world that you are different than what you are actually now.
No, I say we have a different value proposition, but that is a different matter. I never said that we are good, I think. Dankeschön. Enforcement of conditions in those countries. I think that was still your question. I'm going to say, you know, if they want de-risking from the European Union, then they will have to play by some rules of the European Union. And if the value proposition or if what they find in the country is already good enough for them to invest by themselves, then they're a multinational company that plays by the rules of multinational company. If they want to have some state support, some European Union support, then we also have a bit of leverage on them. And that, I think, was the last question for me. Do you want to ask any questions?
Two questions. I think they're interlinked, I think. As I understand your question, Hannes, if you mean if the raw materials are produced in Europe, is it good for the Maghreb? No. It's not good. It's why it's a whole problem. I mean, we have rentier states. No? They are living, existing with the export of these raw materials. So if we have, the question is how to use these rents to overcome rents. That's the whole question, and to overcome rent economies. And that's why the second question is so important, is it possible in this period of transition, world transition actually, even to transition to consuming others, producing other way as before, etc., is it possible for the market to use this as a chance, maybe not to produce a lot of jobs like produced here with industrialization in Europe? You are right. But we have something like comparative advantages comparing with the relation to Europe, comparing to other regions. And the question is, I mean, from my point of view, that these industries, European companies producing in China, they have to stop to do this because of the environment problem. Yeah, in the long durée, they have to stop them and I think we need to have new maybe green industry, etc., where Europe can have to take the Maghreb in consideration and to produce there and to include this region in the European strategy as part of the European market. And then we have we have, I think it's a chance. It's a chance. Until now, that's my problem actually. Okay, we can produce energy for Europe, but the question is, do these regimes not use this energy like using oil money to stabilize their dictatorship and to use it for security? We have countries buying the most armament in the world. Yeah, it's crazy. How? And I think when Europe think, and we have a lot of money of red money is used to buy food, and that's also a very important question for the future of this region. We have Sahara until Spain in the next time, so we have to think seriously about this problem, and that's what I mean. That Europe have to do not Green Deal, but to include social deal also, and political deal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think from my part, I would like to just massively thank you for accepting our invitation, for being on the roundtable here, Constanze Veeh. We knew it would be provocative, and I hope it was super. That was as interesting for you as it was for me being here in this position. And well, a lot of open questions. We could continue discussion now in the conclusion with a little bit of farewell moment for the conference now, and we finish here. For my part, I would like to thank you everybody that participated yesterday and today. I think it was a very successful conference with very, very interesting discussions and conversations and networking. I hope you're more than the audience are more than welcome to continue this discussion now outside with a little bit of wine, I would imagine. And I will give the microphone to Hannes for some concluding notes. Thank you.
Thank you also for the panel. Thank you very much. And also for the very interesting last 2 days of intensive discussion, your participation at the conference. Luckily, we received another 3 years grant. So with a more intensive focus on the European Union in the future. Let's learn how we can. Well, thank you again. But this conference would not have been possible without our team. So especially I want to thank Johan. He was the guy who was organizing the conference and the logistics. Thank you very much. We have our student assistants who managed all stuff behind our visibility. Thank you also very much. Let us continue discussing with a glass of wine and small snacks outside, and feel free to join the discussion. Thank you very much.
So, jetzt haben wir sehr gute Kontakt.
Für die nächsten 3 Jahre.
Ungefähr.
Thank you very much.
Hoffentlich.
Thank you very much.
Gracias.
war knapp.
Voy saliendo, chicos.
Sí.